The galaxy had known peace for 11,000 years. Not the fragile, uneasy peace of tired enemies, but the deep, structured peace of a civilization so vast, so ancient, so utterly confident in its own dominance, that the concept of war had become little more than a museum exhibit. Something primitive species did. Something that ended badly for the primitive species. The Ketharan Dominion ruled 47 star systems, their fleet numbered in the tens of thousands. Their oldest warship had been commissioned before humanity had discovered fire. Ambassador Vexeral stood at the center of the Grand Council floor, his 4 iridescent wings folded in the diplomatic posture that, among his kind, communicated absolute certainty. He had delivered ultimatums before. It was, in his estimation, the simplest of administrative tasks. Today's target: a tiny, unremarkable blue-green rock orbiting a mediocre yellow star on the unfashionable outer rim of the Milky Way. Earth. Population: approximately 8 billion. Spacefaring status: barely a century old. Military capability: laughable by any interstellar standard. The Ketharan tactical computer had assessed the humans at level 2 on the galactic threat scale, 1 step above bacteria, 2 steps below a minor asteroid field. Ambassador Vexeral cleared his throat, a sound like wind chimes made of bone, and activated the quantum broadcast array. His message would reach Earth in precisely 0.003 seconds. Their response time, the computer predicted, would be approximately 48 hours of panicked governmental deliberation, followed by groveling submission. That was the standard timeline for Level 2 civilizations. He had done this 14 times before. It always went the same way. People of Earth, the Ketharan Dominion has observed your species for 112 of your years. In that time you have demonstrated sufficient biological complexity to warrant acknowledgement, but insufficient cultural maturity to warrant equality. Effective immediately, the planet you call Earth is hereby designated Protectorate World 7441 under Dominion authority. You will cease all deep space exploration beyond your own solar system. You will submit quarterly resource assessments to Dominion administrators. You will reduce your military infrastructure by 94% within 18 of your months. Non-compliance will result in a demonstration of Dominion force. We trust you understand the weight of what has just been communicated. You have 48 hours. Choose wisely. Vexeral closed the channel. He turned to his aide, Thos, a young officer on his first diplomatic posting. Have the compliance forms prepared, Vexeral said, already moving toward the banquet hall. They will sign them. They always sign them. Thos hesitated. He had been studying Earth's historical archives, a habit his superiors found peculiar and slightly embarrassing. Ambassador, he said carefully, I have been reviewing their military history. A brief exercise, I imagine, Vexeral said, unconcerned. Sir, they have been continuously at war with each other for approximately 10,000 years. Vexeral paused. He turned slowly. With each other, he repeated. Yes, sir. Their own species. Constantly. For 10 millennia. And they never, not once, went extinct. A long silence followed. Somewhere in the depths of Vexeral's ancient 11,000-year peacetime brain, something small and cold began to move. He dismissed it. Level 2 civilizations did not resist the Dominion. It simply was not done. He went to the banquet. 48 hours later, Earth's response arrived. It was not the compliance form. General Adesi Okonkwo had not slept in 31 hours. She stood at the head of the Global Emergency Council, a body that had never actually met in person until 3 days ago, because the scenarios requiring its activation had always seemed theoretical. Pandemic protocol, asteroid impact contingency, alien ultimatum. Nobody had really thought they'd need that last one. She looked around the table. 41 heads of state, 400 military advisors, and every living Nobel laureate in physics, all staring at her. Behind her, on the main screen, the Ketharan ultimatum played on loop, translated into every human language, annotated by the finest xenolinguists Earth could assemble in 48 hours. The conclusion of every analysis was the same. The Ketharon meant every word. The question on the table was not whether the threat was real. The question was what humanity was going to do about it. 14 hours earlier, a French physicist named Dr. Isabelle Renard had quietly run the numbers on the Dominion fleet versus Earth's current combined military capability. She had then very calmly closed her laptop, walked to the nearest window, stared out at the Geneva skyline for a long moment and said, to no one in particular, that they were, technically speaking, in an extremely difficult position. That was the scientific community's way of saying they were outgunned by approximately 4,000 to 1. But Adeyeze Okonkwo had not built her career, had not survived 3 wars, 2 coups, and 1 very memorable incident in the South China Sea by accepting the framing of her enemies. She looked at the screen. She looked at the ultimatum. She thought about something her grandmother used to say back in Lagos. The lion does not explain itself to the sheep. But it also, notably, had no idea what to do about the people who ate lions for sport. Here is what I know about my species, she said, to the room, to the world, because the session was being broadcast live to every human being on Earth. We have been told, many times throughout our history, to kneel, by empires, by conquerors, by people with bigger armies and better weapons and God on their side. She let the silence sit. We are still here. They are not. The room held its breath. Draft the response, she said. We are not signing their form. We are sending them ours. To the Ketharon Dominion. We have received your communication. We have reviewed your terms. Our response is as follows. No. The people of Earth do not recognize your authority over our planet, our solar system, or our species. We do not accept the designation of protectorate. We do not acknowledge your claim of dominion. What we do acknowledge is that you have, in the last 48 hours, made a strategic error that your historians will be discussing for a very long time. You have declared war on a species that has been at war with itself for 10,000 years and survived. You have no idea what that means. You are about to find out. Earth is not a level 2 civilization. Earth is a level 2 civilization that has spent 10 millennia learning how to fight things much bigger than it. Come if you must, we will be ready. General Adeyeze Okonkwo, United Earth Command. The message transmitted at 14:32 Geneva time. By 14:35, it had been received by every civilization in the quadrant. By 14:37, 17 alien embassies had filed emergency updates to their Earth threat assessments. By 14:40, Ambassador Vex Raal had stopped eating his banquet dinner. By 14:45, Thos, the young aide, had quietly begun backing up his personal files to an emergency drive. Nobody laughed at humanity's response. The galaxy had been around long enough to know that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not the creature that had never been hurt. It was the creature that had been hurt, endlessly, by everything, and learned. Fleet Admiral Grax Toom had commanded Dominion forces for 200 years. He had pacified 17 worlds. He had never lost a campaign. His record was, in Dominion military circles, considered somewhat mythological. He stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, a warship 4 kilometers long armed with enough firepower to sterilize a moon, and stared at the tactical display with an expression his crew had never seen on him before. Confusion. The battle for Earth's solar system had begun 3 days ago. It was not going according to the tactical computer's projections. The computer had projected 42 hours to full planetary submission. What had actually happened was considerably more complicated. The first problem was the mines, millions of them seeded throughout the outer solar system in patterns that defied Dominion tactical logic, because they weren't following Dominion tactical logic. They were following something else, something older, something refined over 10,000 years of humans trying to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. The second problem was the ships. Earth's fleet was small. The Dominion had known this. What the Dominion had not adequately accounted for was that small did not mean simple. Human warships were dense, packed with redundant systems, overlapping weapons platforms, and a frankly alarming number of what the Dominion tactical computer kept classifying as structural anomalies, but which the humans called armor. The third problem, and this was the one that had caused Grax Toom to stop sleeping, was the humans themselves. Every other species the Dominion had faced, when confronted with overwhelming force, had done the sensible thing. They had retreated, regrouped, and eventually surrendered. It was rational. It was survivable. It was what intelligent species did. Humans apparently had not received this memo. When the Dominion destroyed a human ship, the surviving crew found other ships to fight from. When the Dominion took a position, the humans flanked it. When the Dominion applied overwhelming pressure to one front, the humans applied the same overwhelming pressure to 3 other fronts simultaneously, somehow with resources they should not mathematically have had. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka of the EFS Relentless had spent 4 days fighting through the wreckage of her own destroyer, jury-rigging systems that the Dominion tactical computer classified as non-functional, until her ship was firing on Dominion vessels again. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb had led a team of 11 through a section of space station that the Dominion had already declared cleared 3 times, because Webb kept finding new angles. Colonel Fatima al-Rashid had coordinated a counter-offensive from a command post that had no communications array, no power grid, and no structural integrity rating above 12%, using nothing but a hand radio and what her after-action report would later describe as educated intuition. These were not exceptional humans. They were, by human standards, doing their jobs. That was perhaps the most disturbing thing of all. Counselor Methva was 4,000 years old. She had been on the Grand Council longer than some species had existed. She had seen civilizations rise and fall. She had, she believed, seen everything the galaxy had to offer. She had never seen anything like the reports coming in from the Sol system. The numbers were wrong, not slightly wrong, cosmically, fundamentally wrong. The Dominion fleet had engaged a force 1/400th its size, and after 3 weeks of sustained combat, had lost more ships than it had lost in the previous 100 years of Dominion history combined. How, she said very quietly to the assembled admirals and strategists, is this possible? It was not really a question. It was the verbal equivalent of a mind trying to reboot. Admiral Graxtum's hologram flickered before her. He looked, she noticed, considerably older than he had 3 weeks ago. Counselor, we underestimated several factors. Several, she repeated. Their adaptability, their anger, frankly. They fight as though every engagement is personal. Our tactical models assume that intelligent species prioritize self-preservation. The humans appear to have a different priority structure. Which is? Graxtum paused. He had been trying to articulate this for 2 weeks. Spite, he said finally. They appear to be motivated in significant part by spite. The council chamber was silent. Clarify, said Counselor Methva. They fight harder when they are losing. Our models predict that increasing pressure on a species reduces their combat effectiveness as survival instinct overrides aggression. For humans, it appears to work in reverse. The worse their situation, the more creative and the more dangerous they become. We have intercepted communications between human commanders. They use the phrase, our translators struggled with this, we believe it is approximately, make them pay for every inch. It is a territorial concept. They apply it to space. Another silence. Admiral, said Counselor Methva, what is your strategic recommendation? Graxatum, 200-year veteran undefeated fleet admiral of the Ketharan Dominion, took a slow breath. I recommend we open diplomatic communications. The council erupted. When it quieted, it was because Counselor Methva had raised one hand. On what terms? She asked. Whatever terms they will accept, said Graxtum, before they take the offensive. General Adaze Okonkwo read the Dominion's request for diplomatic talks twice. Then she set it down on her desk. Then she looked out the window at the Geneva skyline, the same skyline Dr. Renard had stared at when she calculated how outgunned humanity was. And she allowed herself very briefly to close her eyes. She thought about the people they had lost. Good people. Irreplaceable people. Ships that would never come home, and crews that had bought with everything they had the chance for this moment, this message on her desk, to exist. She thought about what she was going to say. Then she opened her eyes and she picked up the pen and she wrote, To the Ketharan Dominion, We acknowledge your request for diplomatic communication. We will speak with you. Our terms for engagement are as follows. First, Earth is sovereign. This is not a point of negotiation. It is a precondition. Second, every species currently designated as a Dominion protectorate will be offered a formal review of their status, conducted by a neutral body, within 18 months of the signing of any treaty. Third, the Dominion will provide full reparations for damages incurred during this conflict, to be assessed by mutual agreement. Fourth, the Keth-Aran Dominion will formally acknowledge, in a document transmitted galaxy-wide with the same reach as the original ultimatum, that Earth is an autonomous, sovereign peer civilization, not a protectorate, not a protected world, a peer. If these terms are acceptable as a starting point, we will talk. If they are not acceptable, we will continue the conversation we have been having for the past 8 weeks. We await your reply. General Adaeze Okonkwo, United Earth Command. The Dominion replied in 6 hours. They accepted the terms as a starting point. The station had been chosen because it belonged to neither party. It orbited a dead star, equidistant from Earth and Keth-Aran Prime, and it had last hosted a diplomatic function in a diplomatic era so distant that the current Dominion's oldest living citizens had not been born yet. Ambassador Vexral, who had not, as it turned out, been replaced because the Dominion Council felt that the ambassador who had started this needed to be the one who finished it, stood across the table from General Okonkwo. He looked at her. She looked at him. They had spent 3 weeks in this room and in adjacent rooms arguing over every clause of every article. They had been, at various points, furious with each other. They had also, at 3 in the morning on a particularly difficult Tuesday, shared something that the translator had rendered as tea, though it was not precisely tea on either side, and had talked for 2 hours about their respective histories in a way that was not diplomatic at all. Vexral had found, to his considerable surprise, that he liked General Okonkwo. This, he suspected, was because she operated from a position he understood, someone who had fought for everything they had, and had the scars to prove it. He thought about Thos's warning. He should have listened. "I want to say something," Vexral said before they signed. Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. "My people have a saying. We say that a civilization's true strength is measured not by the force of its conquest, but by the dignity of its defeat." He paused. "I believe, having spent these weeks with you, that your people have a corollary to this. Something about what is measured in the force of your survival." Okonkwo looked at him for a long moment. "We don't really have a saying," she said. "We just keep going." Vexral nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I noticed." They signed the treaty, the document transmitted galaxy-wide, as per Earth's terms. Every civilization in the quadrant received it, the formal acknowledgement in Dominion script and 47 other languages that Earth was a peer, not a protectorate, not a managed world. A peer. 17 of those civilizations had been Dominion protectorates for centuries. 16 of them immediately requested the status review that Earth's terms had mandated. The Dominion, to the surprise of many observers, complied. Those, the young aide who had backed up his personal files, wrote a paper that circulated widely in Dominion academic circles. Its thesis was straightforward. The Keth-Aran Dominion had spent 11,000 years pacifying species that were afraid of it. It had, in doing so, forgotten what it was like to encounter a species that was not afraid of anything, not because it was naive, but because it had already been afraid of everything for 10,000 years, and had decided that fear was less useful than forward momentum. The paper was titled, "What the Humans Knew That We Did Not." It was assigned reading at the Dominion Military Academy within 18 months. On Earth, in Geneva, General Adaeze Okonkwo retired. She had been offered 11 different titles and approximately 4 ceremonial positions of galactic significance, all of which she had politely declined. She went home to Lagos. She planted a garden. Her granddaughter, 7 years old, born 6 months after the treaty signing, asked her once what the war had been about. Okonkwo thought about it for a while. She thought about the fleet, about the ships that hadn't come home, About Vex Ral's expression across the table at 3 in the morning when he'd realized she wasn't going to back down. Someone, she said finally, made the mistake of thinking that because we were small, we were finished. What happened? Her granddaughter asked. Okonkwo smiled. We explained the difference. And in 47 star systems, on 17 newly sovereign worlds, something very old and very quiet began, for the first time in a very long time, to grow. Hope, it turned out, was contagious. The humans had always known that. Now the galaxy knew it too. The prison ship Vorkai's Mercy drifted in the cold dark between star systems, carrying 112 children. None of them were criminals. None of them had committed any offense under any galactic law, written or unwritten, ancient or new. They had been taken from their homes, their schools, their beds. Taken while their parents screamed and reached and were held back by soldiers wearing the silver and black insignia of the Keth Dominion. They ranged in age from 4 years old to 17. They were human children, and the Dominion had decided they were useful, not as slaves, not yet, as leverage, yet. As Supreme Chancellor Drevan Voketh, third of his name, ruler of 42 systems, commander of 900 warships, had grown tired of humanity's stubbornness at the negotiating table. For 6 years, the Terran coalition had refused to surrender navigational rights through the Kepler corridor. That stretch of space, just 11 light-years wide, was the most direct route between the Dominion's eastern and western territories. Without it, Keth supply lines stretched an additional 43 days. 43 days meant fuel costs. Fuel costs meant profit margins. Profit margins meant everything to a civilization built on commerce and conquest. Drevan Voketh had offered trade deals. Humanity had declined. He had offered military alliances. Humanity had said they would consider it, which in diplomatic language meant no. He had threatened economic sanctions. Humanity had shrugged, tightened its own belts, and told the Chancellor that the Kepler corridor was sovereign Terran space and would remain so. So Drevan Voketh had tried something different. His intelligence operatives had identified 17 human colony worlds, frontier settlements, thin on military presence, rich in civilians. And on a Tuesday morning by the Terran standard calendar, Keth extraction teams had landed on 6 of those worlds simultaneously. They had not fired a single weapon. There had been no battle. They had simply walked into schools and community centers and playgrounds, announced that the children of these settlements were being taken into protective Dominion custody, and departed. 112 children. The Chancellor's message to the Terran Coalition Council had been simple, elegant, and, in his estimation, utterly unanswerable. Agree to our terms within 30 days, or the children will be processed into Dominion labor integration. They will not be harmed if you cooperate. The choice, as always, belongs to humanity. He had expected panic. He had expected emergency sessions, tearful diplomats, desperate concessions. He had dealt with dozens of species across his 40-year reign, and every single one of them, when their young were threatened, had folded. It was the universal constant of intelligent life. You could threaten armies, economies, entire civilizations, and warriors would stand firm. But threaten the children, and the warriors became parents. Parents made bad decisions. Bad decisions made good deals for Drevan Voketh. He poured himself a glass of Shiverroot wine and waited. He was still waiting when his communications officer came sprinting into the throne chamber. Not walking, not jogging, but sprinting, with a look on his face that Drevan Voketh had never seen on any subordinate in 4 decades of rule. It was not fear, exactly. It was the specific expression of someone who had just looked over a cliff edge and realized the cliff was far, far taller than anyone had measured. Chancellor, the officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. The humans have responded. It was 11 words. You have 72 hours to return them, every single one. Drevan read it twice. Then he laughed, a short, sharp laugh of genuine disbelief. That's it? No terms? No conditions? No... There is an attachment, Chancellor. He opened the attachment. It was a sensor feed. Live, real-time, authenticated by 3 independent relay stations so there could be no question of fabrication. It showed space, specifically, the space along the outer border of Keth Dominion territory. And in that space, moving in complete silence in perfect formation, were ships. Not a patrol fleet, not a battle group. Every human warship in existence. To understand what Dravan Voketh saw on that screen, one must first understand something about humanity that most galactic civilizations had spent 300 years getting wrong. The Keth Dominion had done its research, as it always did before an operation. Their intelligence files on humanity were thorough, 2,000 pages of analysis covering Terran military capability, economic output, political structure, and psychological profile. The psychological profile section was particularly detailed. It had taken 17 analysts 8 months to compile, and had been personally reviewed by the Chancellor himself. The analysts had noted that humans were, compared to most spacefaring species, remarkably aggressive when threatened. They had a long history of internal warfare that had, paradoxically, made them exceptionally good at external warfare. Their military technology was competitive, not superior to the Dominions, but not inferior either. Their soldiers were disciplined, adaptive, and disturbingly creative in combat situations. All of this was accurate. What the analysts had failed to capture, what 17 brilliant minds and 8 months of study had entirely missed, was the emotional architecture of humanity. They had studied humans at war. They had not understood what made humans go to war. There is a phrase, ancient by Terran standards, that predates spaceflight by several thousand years. Do not come between a parent and their child. It appears in various forms, in over 200 distinct human languages and cultures. It predates writing. It predates agriculture. It is carved into the oldest stones humans ever shaped into monuments, scratched into cave walls alongside pictures of hunts and fires, and the stars that humans had always, even before they could reach them, looked up at with hunger. The Keth analysts had classified this as elevated protective instinct, factor 3.2 on the behavioral threat scale. A manageable variable. Something to be leveraged, not feared. They had never bothered to ask, how many warships does a factor 3.2 protective instinct actually produce? The answer, as Dravan Voketh was now discovering, was all of them. The Terran Coalition Navy comprised 407 active warships. This included everything from the massive dreadnoughts of the First Fleet to the sleek fast destroyers assigned to border patrol. Under normal operational doctrine, the Coalition Navy was distributed across Terran space. Some ships on patrol, some in dry dock, some on convoy escort, some in training exercises. At any given moment, less than a quarter of the fleet could be assembled in one place within 30 days. 4 days after the children were taken, all 407 ships were moving toward Keth space. They were not moving at combat speed. They were moving at maximum speed, a distinction that most military minds never needed to make, because the two are not the same. Maximum speed strips away formation discipline, fuel efficiency, tactical spacing. It is the speed of a fleet that is not planning an approach. It is the speed of a fleet that is simply coming, as fast as physics allows, and does not care what it looks like when it arrives. But the ships were only part of what Dravan Voketh was seeing. Behind the warships, and this was the part that made his intelligence chief go very quiet, and remain very quiet for a long time, were the civilian vessels. Modified freighters with weapons welded to their hulls. Mining ships carrying plasma cutters that, at close range, would do exactly what their designers never intended. Transport vessels loaded not with cargo but with human soldiers who had not waited for official mobilization, who had simply shown up at spaceports with weapons and armor, and said in various ways that they were going and someone should give them a ride. And behind those, still more ships, private vessels, pleasure craft, racing yachts, ancient, creaking colony ships that hadn't left orbit in 40 years, shuddering back to life because someone had decided to restart their engines and point them at Keth space. The sensor feed showed 1,143 vessels. For a civilization of 300 colony worlds, spread across 60 light years, Humanity had, in 4 days, assembled the largest fleet ever recorded in this arm of the galaxy, and they were moving at maximum speed, and they were not slowing down. Drivan Voketh sat very still for a long time. Then, quietly, he said to his communications officer, "Get me Admiral Tessavar, and someone bring me a larger screen." The first call came from Ambassador Lyrian of the Vial Consortium, humanity's closest galactic ally, and, more importantly, a civilization that shared a 2,000 light-year border with the Keth Dominion. "Chancellor," Lyrian said, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid sequence, the Vial expression for profound anxiety. "I am calling as a friend. Turn the ships around. Return the children immediately." "The situation is under diplomatic review," Drivan said. "Chancellor, with respect, I have been watching the Terran fleet feed for the past 6 hours. Lyrian paused. "I have also been receiving communications from my border stations. The humans did not simply send warships. They sent everything. Our analysts believe they are operating on a principle we do not have a word for in Vial. The closest translation is," another pause, longer this time. "The closest translation is, until none remain." Drivan frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means they are not sending a force size to retrieve the children, Chancellor. They are sending a force size to ensure that whoever took the children cannot take any children, ever again." The call ended shortly after. Lyrian had other calls to make. Over the next 18 hours, Drivan Voketh received 26 communications from heads of state, military commanders, trade alliance representatives, and neutral observers from across the galactic community. The content varied. The tone did not. The Marathi hegemony, who had fought a 3-year border war against humanity 40 years ago and negotiated an uneasy peace, sent a single line: "We advise the Chancellor to consider the outcome of every conflict in which a human child has been used as leverage. There are no such outcomes on record, because there are no such conflicts on record. No civilization has ever tried this before. There is a reason." The collective of Saren, who were pacifists by both culture and biology, sent a more emotional message. "We are begging you. We have studied human history for 200 years, and we know what they are capable of when they are afraid for their young. They are not angry yet. They are still in the stage before anger. Please, Chancellor, there is still time." What stage was before anger? Drivan sent a query to his xenopsychology team. The answer came back in 40 minutes, and the lead analyst, a Keth academic who had spent 30 years studying alien behavioral patterns, had flagged it with the highest priority alert color. The stage before anger in human psychology, when offspring are threatened, is called resolve. It is characterized by the complete absence of panic, negotiation impulse, or self-preservation instinct. A human in a state of resolve regarding their young is not thinking about outcomes. They are not calculating odds. They are not weighing costs. They have already accepted all possible costs. They are simply executing. Chancellor, I must advise in the strongest possible terms. A human in this state does not stop. The fleet you are seeing is not a threat. It is a statement of intent by a species that has already decided. The question is no longer whether they will arrive. The question is whether the children will be there when they do. Drivan read the report. Then he read it again. Then he made a decision that his admirals would later describe as the fastest strategic reversal in Keth Dominion history. He ordered the Vorkai's Mercy to change course. But the prison ship was deep in Dominion space. 6 days of travel from the border even at full speed. The children could not be returned in 72 hours. It was a physical impossibility. So Drivan Voketh did something he had never done in 40 years of rule. He picked up the communication relay and called the Terran coalition directly. Not his ambassador, not a diplomatic intermediary, not a carefully worded formal channel. He called the direct emergency line, which connected, after 3 seconds of silence, to a room he had never seen before. It was a plain room, gray walls, a long table, and seated at that table were people who did not look like diplomats. They were wearing military uniforms, They had the expressions of people who had not slept in 3 days and did not intend to. At the center of the table sat a woman. She was older, gray-haired, with the kind of stillness that Dravan recognized, after a lifetime of politics, as the stillness of someone who has made all their decisions and is simply waiting for events to catch up. Her name, he would later learn, was Admiral General Sarah Mwangi. She was 67 years old. She had 3 grandchildren. 2 of them were on the Vorkai's mercy. She looked at Dravan Voketh through the screen, and she did not speak first. She simply waited, with that terrible stillness, for him to say something. "The children will be returned," Dravan said. "I give you my personal assurance. However, the ship carrying them is 6 days from the border. We know where the ship is, Chancellor." Her voice was quiet, conversational. It was somehow much worse than shouting would have been. "We've been tracking it since the first day. We know its speed. We know its course. We know every crew member aboard." A pause. "Then you understand the physical limitation? I understand that you have approximately 49 hours remaining on your 72-hour window." She folded her hands on the table. "I also understand that the Vorkai's Mercy is currently traveling at 62% of its maximum rated speed, which means it could be moving faster." Dravan blinked. "Our prison transport protocols require—" "I don't want to hear about your protocols, Chancellor." Still quiet. Still. "I want to hear that you have ordered that ship to full speed, that you have personally guaranteed the safety and well-being of every child aboard, and that you have arranged a transfer point at the border so that my people can take custody of our children before your deadline expires." A pause. "I will wait while you make those arrangements." He stared at her. In 40 years, no one had spoken to him like this. Not allied kings, not conquered generals, not his own admirals. "You are aware," he said carefully, "that my fleet— Your fleet is inferior to mine in this engagement, Chancellor. You have approximately 900 ships. I have 1,143, and mine are moving at maximum speed, and roughly half of them are being piloted by people who have not slept in 4 days and would not stop if you personally ask them to." She tilted her head, very slightly. "I am not negotiating with you. I am giving you a very short window to do the right thing before I no longer have the ability to stop what is coming. Do you understand the distinction?" He did. He had never understood anything so clearly in his life. "I will give the orders immediately," Dravan Voketh said. "I know you will." Admiral General Mwangi unfolded her hands. "I'll stay on the line while you do." The Vorkai's Mercy reached the border of Keth space with 7 hours to spare. The prison ship's captain, a Keith officer named Sorvin Dahl, who had spent the last 4 days watching the Terran fleet approach on long-range sensors and had filed 3 formal complaints with Dominion High Command about being placed in this situation, brought his vessel to a full stop at the designated transfer coordinates with a precision that spoke of profound personal motivation. Waiting for him were 6 Terran ships. Just 6. Small ones. 2 medical frigates, 2 personnel transports, and 2 escort destroyers. The rest of the fleet was still moving, still coming, a wall of ships that filled every sensor screen on the Vorkai's Mercy, like a closing horizon. Captain Dahl had requested, through official channels, that the approaching fleet be ordered to halt. The response had come back from Terran Command in under a minute. "They are aware of the transfer. They are not stopping. You have 7 hours. We suggest you move quickly." The transfer took 4 hours. 112 children came off the Vorkai's Mercy in groups, escorted by Keth crew members who had been briefed, and with extreme emphasis, that they were to be gentle, respectful, and to cause absolutely no further incident of any kind. Medical teams from the Terran frigates met each group at the airlock. The children were frightened and tired and hungry, and some of them were very young, and some of them had been crying for 4 days. And some of them had gone quiet in the particular way that adults who work with traumatized children recognize immediately and find deeply alarming. All 112 were alive. All 112 were unharmed, physically at least. The last child to cross the airlock was a small girl, 4 years old, named Cass, who had been taken from the agricultural colony on Kepler 7. She was carrying a small stuffed animal, a handmade thing, clearly old, clearly beloved, that had somehow survived the abduction intact. The Keth crew member escorting her stopped at the airlock and, in a moment that would later appear in every major news feed across the galactic community, crouched down to her level and said something quietly in his own language. A Terran medic, who had studied Keth as part of her xenolinguistics training, later translated it as, "I am sorry this happened. Go home." Cass looked at him. Then she crossed the airlock. The moment the last child was confirmed aboard the Terran vessels, Admiral General Mwangi's voice came over the open channel, the one that every ship in the fleet, human and Keth alike, was monitoring. "All children confirmed safe," she said. "All Terran vessels hold position." The fleet, 1,143 ships that had been moving at maximum speed for 4 days, stopped. For approximately 3 minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the fleet began to turn. Not all of it, most of it. The warships, the military vessels, the official Terran Coalition Navy. They turned, in formation, and began the long journey home. But the civilian ships, the modified freighters, the mining vessels, the ancient colony ships that had restarted their engines for the first time in decades, they held position a little longer. Held it in a way that was not aggressive, not threatening, simply present. A reminder. A notation in the universe's margin. We were here. We came. Remember that we came. Then they, too, turned. Captain Dahl of the Vorkai's Mercy watched them go on his sensor screen. His hands were shaking. He had been a military officer for 22 years and had never been afraid of anything in his career. He filed a formal request for reassignment to an interior posting the following morning. The galactic community had a word for what had happened. Several words, actually, in several languages, coined in the hours and days after the transfer as commentators and historians and political analysts struggled to describe an event that did not fit neatly into any existing framework. The most used term in Terran Standard was simply the response. Clean, simple, accurate. What followed the response was more complicated. Dravan Voketh, in the 48 hours after the children's return, faced the worst political crisis of his 4-decade reign. Not from the Terran Coalition, they had, true to their word, recalled the fleet. They sent no demands, issued no ultimatums, claimed no victory. Admiral General Mwangi gave a single press statement, 9 words long. "Our children are home. We have nothing further to say." The pressure on Dravan came from within. His own admirals, his own cabinet, his own High Senate, the 120-member body that had rubber-stamped his decisions for 30 years without complaint, and was now suddenly finding its voice. "You nearly destroyed us," said Fleet Admiral Vorak at the emergency session. "Not in battle, there was no battle. You nearly destroyed us because you genuinely did not understand what you were doing. I was applying leverage. You applied leverage to the one species in this galaxy that does not respond to leverage the way anything else does." Vorak's composure cracked. The first time Dravan had ever seen it crack. "I have read the battle records, Chancellor. I have studied every conflict humanity has fought since they reached the stars. Every single one. And I want you to tell me, in any of those records, in any of the data our intelligence services have collected over 300 years, is there a single instance, one, where a threat against a human child resulted in anything other than complete and total escalation?" Silence. "There is not," Vorak said quietly, "because it has never been tried before. No one was stupid enough to try it before." The political fallout consumed the next 3 months. Dravan Voketh retained his chancellorship, just barely, but surrendered the Kepler Corridor negotiation entirely. Terran navigational sovereignty was formally acknowledged. The Keth Dominion paid reparations. The intelligence officials who had designed the extraction operation were reassigned. Quietly, without ceremony, the 2,000-page psychological profile of humanity was recalled, classified, and sent to a team of analysts with a single instruction. Start over. Get it right this time. The new profile, when it was finally completed, 14 months later, was considerably shorter. The key finding took up less than a single page. The lead analyst, a Keth academic named Severeth, who had spent those 14 months doing almost nothing but studying human history and culture and biology, had chosen to write it not as a clinical assessment but as a warning, formatted in the emergency alert style used for natural disasters and weapons of mass destruction. It read, "Humans are not unique in loving their children. Nearly every sapient species we have studied has some form of parental protective instinct. What makes humans different is not the presence of this instinct, but its absolute, unconditional, non-negotiable nature. Human protective instinct toward offspring does not include a cost-benefit calculation. When a human child is in danger, the human parent, and by extension, the human community, and by further extension, the entire human civilization, does not ask, 'Can we win?' They do not ask, 'What will this cost us?' They do not ask, 'Is this wise?' They ask only, 'How quickly can we get there?' This is not a vulnerability to be exploited. We must be absolutely clear on this point. This is not a vulnerability to be exploited. Every previous attempt, in their own history, across centuries of internal and external conflict, to use human children as leverage has ended the same way. Not with negotiation, not with surrender, with the complete removal of the entity that made the threat. This is not metaphor. This is not hyperbole. This is a statistical observation made across several thousand years of recorded human conflict. The Terran coalition did not send 1,100 ships to demonstrate military capability. They sent 1,100 ships because 1,100 ships was what they had. If they had 11,000, they would have sent 11,000. This is the point that all previous analyses have missed. The fleet size was not strategic. It was logistical. They sent everything that could move because the concept of enough does not exist in this context. Final recommendation: do not touch the children, under any circumstances, for any reason. This is not a diplomatic recommendation. This is a survival recommendation. The document was distributed to every member of the Keth High Senate, all fleet admirals, and every intelligence director in the Dominion. It was also, through channels that were never officially acknowledged, transmitted to the governments of 37 other spacefaring civilizations. Most of them already knew. Most of them had, for 300 years, been trying to find a diplomatic way to say exactly what that document said, without being asked why they knew it so well. A few of them, in private, admitted to their own historians that they had learned the hard way, early in their contact with humanity, and had considered it impolite to warn others. Some things, they reasoned, a civilization needed to discover for itself. It was a lesson, after all, that only needed to be learned once. Back on Kepler 7, on an agricultural colony that was still rebuilding its sense of safety, a small girl named Cass was asleep in her own bed, in her own room, in her family's house on the edge of a field of grain that stretched all the way to the horizon. Her stuffed animal was tucked under her arm. Her mother was sitting in the chair beside the bed, watching her sleep, the way parents do when they have been afraid and are no longer afraid, but cannot quite convince their body of that fact yet. Outside the window the stars were bright and quiet. Far away, in the cold dark between star systems, in throne rooms and senate chambers and military briefing rooms across 42 Keth-controlled worlds, people were still talking about what had happened, still analyzing it, still writing reports and filing assessments and updating threat matrices. The stars did not care. They had watched humanity for a long time, long enough to know that this was not a new story. It was the oldest story, and it always ended the same way. The warship Eternal Dominion was the largest vessel ever constructed by the Vreth Empire. A cathedral of war 3 kilometers long, plated in auric titanium alloy, armed with 47 plasma lance batteries, and crewed by 11,000 soldiers sworn to the Emperor's blood. It had reduced 4 planetary civilizations to cinders. It had ended 2 interstellar governments without suffering so much as a scorched hull panel. Admirals wept when they saw it on their scanners. Senators drafted surrender documents before it even entered orbit. It was currently aimed at Earth. High Commander Seth Varel stood at the forward observation deck, his 4 amber eyes scanning the blue-green marble hanging in the void below him. Primitive. Soft. Wet. The planet looked like something you'd find in a natural history archive, the kind of world younger species romanticized before they learned the universe's first and only real law. Power is the only language worth speaking. "Confirm population count," he said, clasping his scaled hands behind his back. His aide, Sub-Commander Iris, consulted her data slate. "Approximately 8 billion, sir. Concentrated mostly on the surface. No orbital infrastructure of military significance. Their most advanced warship is a fusion drive frigate carrying chemical propellant projectile weapons." She paused. "Chemical propellant, sir? They are still using controlled explosions to accelerate metal." A ripple of amusement moved through the bridge crew. Seth Varel allowed himself a thin smile. "And yet the Galactic Accord requires we offer terms before bombardment." His tone carried the same enthusiasm one might reserve for bureaucratic paperwork. "Hail them." "Already attempted, sir," they responded. "In what language?" "Theirs, sir. But our translators are calibrated." The message was... Iris hesitated, which was unusual. Iris did not hesitate. She had survived 3 campaigns and 2 political purges. Hesitation was not in her profile. The message was a name, sir, a single human name, and the phrase, "and she's already on her way." Seth Varel turned from the window. "She?" The proximity alert screamed. Every head on the bridge snapped to the tactical display. A single vessel had just dropped out of FTL approximately 400 meters off their port bow, so close that the gravitational shear from its emergence wave rocked the Eternal Dominion like a dingy in a storm. 11,000 soldiers grabbed for handholds. Plasma arrays swiveled automatically toward the new contact. 3 gunners fired on reflex before their supervisors screamed at them to stand down. The shots hit nothing. The vessel had already moved. It was small. Impossibly small for something that had just executed a micro-jump with that level of precision. A needle-shaped craft barely 40 meters long, matte black, with no visible weapon ports, no energy signature that matched any known human technology, and markings along its flank written in a script that the Vreth translators couldn't immediately parse. "Scan it," Seth Varel said. His voice was controlled. His hearts, all 3 of them, were not. "Scanning. Sir, the hull material is reading as..." The sensor operator trailed off. "Sir, I don't have a classification for this material. It's absorbing our scan beams. I'm getting nothing back." "Life signs?" One. Seth Varel stared at the sleek black needle floating beside his 3-kilometer warship, like a splinter next to a sword. 1 life sign. 1 human. Having just performed a faster-than-light jump with a precision his own best navigators couldn't match. Aboard a ship his sensors couldn't read, that had appeared from nowhere and was now simply hovering there, patient and quiet, as though waiting for someone to open a door. "Open a channel," he said. The main screen flickered. And for the first time in his 30-year military career, High Commander Seth Varel of the Vreth Imperial Navy felt something he hadn't felt since childhood. He felt like he was the one being watched. The face that appeared on screen was human, female by their species categorization, though the Vreth had always found the mammalian distinction difficult to process at a glance. She appeared to be in the mid-range of the human lifespan, which their files indicated was somewhere between 30 and 50 standard cycles. Her hair was dark, pulled back severely from a face that carried no readable expression whatsoever. No fear, no aggression, no submission. She wore no uniform Seth Varel recognized. She sat in what appeared to be a small cockpit, alone, with a cup of something steaming in her left hand. She was drinking something hot, while floating 400 meters from the most powerful warship in the known galaxy. "Commander Seth Varel," she said. The translator rendered her words cleanly, which meant she had spoken in Vreth. Perfect, unaccented Vreth. "My name is Dr. Mara Voss. Earth has authorized me to receive your terms of surrender." The bridge went absolutely silent. Seth Varel blinked all 4 eyes. a Vreth reflex of disorientation he hadn't displayed in public since he was a cadet. I believe you have the situation reversed, Dr. Voss. It is your planet that will be offering surrender. She took a sip of her drink. Is that the position you'd like to lock into? Because I want to make sure I document your choices accurately for the tribunal. What tribunal? Mara Voss set down her cup, reached off screen for something, and when her hand came back it was holding a data chip between two fingers, which she held up toward the screen with the casual patience of someone showing a receipt to a store clerk. The Galactic Accord Tribunal, Article 44, Subsection 9. Unprovoked military aggression against pre-contact Class 4 civilizations. She tilted the chip slightly. You declared war on us 6 weeks ago, Commander. Earth had no sitting ambassador to the Empire, no diplomatic representation, no prior conflict, and no vote in any governing body that affected Vreth interests. Under the Accord, which your Emperor signed in his own blood 17 years ago, that makes this an extermination campaign, which is a Class 1 violation. She paused. There are 47 other species watching this conversation right now through relay stations we positioned last month. Hello, everyone. The communications officer turned slowly toward Seth Varal with an expression of pure alarm. Sir, she's right. We're detecting passive relay signals on 6 different Accord-monitored frequencies. This conversation is being broadcast across... I know what a relay signal is, Seth Varal said quietly. Mara Voss picked her cup back up. I'm going to be honest with you, Commander, because I think you're a practical person and I respect that. The Empire has 3 options right now. Option 1, you open fire on me, which will be broadcast live to 47 civilizations, completing the evidence package for a full Accord sanctions event that will freeze every Vreth trade route within 60 days. Option 2, you fire on Earth, same outcome but with the additional charge of confirmed genocide, which historically triggers a coalition military response, and I've checked the math. You do not want a coalition response right now, given your current fuel reserves in the outer sectors. She paused, just long enough. Option 3, you talk to me. Seth Varal stared at her for a very long time. Behind him he heard Sub-Commander Iris whisper something to the sensor operator. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard the sensor operator's response, which was a single, very quiet Vreth profanity. How long have you been planning this? He asked. Mara Voss smiled for the first time. It didn't reach her eyes. Commander, she said, we've been planning this since you declared war. The silence on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was the kind that had weight to it. Seth Varal had commanded warships for 30 years. He had walked onto the bridges of defeated enemies while they were still burning. He had received news of his own brother's death in combat without flinching. Because flinching was a luxury, the Imperial Navy did not permit its commanders. But standing there, staring at a single human female calmly drinking something warm while his entire campaign strategy unraveled around him like a poorly stitched garment, he was finding control of his expression somewhat harder than usual. You said you've been planning since we declared war, he said. That was 6 weeks ago. Correct. You built that ship in 6 weeks? Mara Voss glanced around her cockpit with an expression of mild amusement. This? No, this is significantly older. We just hadn't needed it yet. Seth Varal filed that away. Humans had faster-than-light technology they hadn't needed yet. He filed that directly next to the growing pile of things his pre-invasion intelligence briefings had gotten catastrophically wrong. The relay network, he said. 47 civilizations. That took longer than 6 weeks to negotiate. It did. Then you were planning before we declared war. We were planning before you decided to declare war, yes. She said it without any particular emphasis, which somehow made it worse. The declaration was a formality. Your fleet movements were not subtle, Commander. We had about 4 months of warning. Plenty of time. He turned slightly, just enough to see Iris in his peripheral vision. She was studying her data slate with the fixed intensity of someone who needed somewhere to look that wasn't at him. He turned back. What do you actually want, Dr. Voss? Officially? I want a formal ceasefire agreement signed under Accord protocol with independent verification. I want the withdrawal of Imperial forces from this sector within 30 standard days. I want reparations set at the standard Article 44 rate, which your legal office can calculate. I'll wait. And I want a formal apology entered into the Accord public record. She paused. Unofficially? Yes? I want you to go home and tell your emperor that the war is over. It never really started. And that the next time the Empire considers targeting a pre-contact species for annexation, someone in the room should ask whether that species has been watching you for longer than you've been watching them. Seth Varel's jaw tightened. You're describing an intelligence operation of considerable scope and resources. Humans have had no formal presence in Accord space. No embassies, no representatives. No visible representatives, Mara said. There's a difference. Another silence, longer this time. He had been briefed on humans. He had read the files himself. Dense documents full of the usual pre-annexation intelligence, population data, military capability assessments, resource valuations, projected resistance timelines. The files had described a species in the early stages of interstellar development. Industrious, somewhat aggressive by mammalian standards, technologically promising but generations behind the galactic average. The projected resistance timeline for a full invasion had been listed as 11 days. 11. His staff had treated it almost as a training exercise. The files had said nothing about this. Who are you? He asked. Not as a commander, almost as a person. I told you. Dr. Mara Voss. That's a name. I'm asking what you are. She looked at him steadily. I'm the person they sent. Why you specifically? For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. Because I asked to come. She said it simply, with no drama, and that simplicity was more unsettling than any threat could have been. Because it meant she had wanted to be here, alone, 400 meters from a warship that could vaporize her in a fraction of a second. She had asked for this, and the question that followed immediately, the question Seth Varel could not stop himself from forming was, what kind of person asks for this? And what does it mean for us that they sent her anyway? I need to consult with my officers, he said finally. Of course, I'll be here. She picked her cup back up, realized it was empty, and reached off screen to refill it from something. Take your time. He muted the channel, turned. His senior officers were watching him with expressions ranging from controlled alarm to barely concealed awe, which on a Vreth military bridge was extraordinary. Iris stepped forward and spoke quietly. Sir, she's right about the relay network. I've confirmed 22 active feeds. The other 25 are likely encrypted. This is being watched. I know. The legal office is running the Article 44 numbers. Preliminary figure is... She glanced at her slate. It's significant, sir. How significant? Iris told him. He didn't visibly react, but one of his aides made a small, involuntary sound. There's more, Iris continued. The sensor team has been running passive analysis on Dr. Voss's vessel since she arrived. No weapons detected, no shielding we can categorize. But they found something in the hull resonance pattern. What? Iris looked at him steadily. The material is consistent with Accord-certified diplomatic immunity shielding. Class Omega. It's the same material used on the Emperor's personal shuttle, sir. Class Omega shielding was not something a species built in 6 weeks. It was not something a pre-contact species should have known existed, and it was certainly not something they should have been able to manufacture without a minimum of 3 decades of metallurgical development and an Accord-certified foundry license. Seth Varial turned back to the screen. Unmuted. Mara Voss looked up from her refilled cup. Where did you get Class Omega shielding? He asked. Traded for it, she said. With whom? Friends. Humans don't have friends in Accord space. Humans have no formal, visible relationships, she said again, patiently. Commander, I understand this is uncomfortable. You came here expecting a very specific kind of conversation, and you're having a completely different one. I don't say that to embarrass you. Your intelligence operation was competent by conventional standards. We just didn't present conventional surfaces. She set down her cup for the second time, and her voice shifted slightly. Still calm, still measured, but with a new layer underneath it, something steady and absolute. The voice of someone who had already seen how this ends. I want you to understand something. Earth is not asking you to leave because we're afraid of you. We're asking you to leave because we've done the analysis and a war between our species ends badly for both of us, and we'd prefer not to go through it. That's not weakness. That's math. You're a pre-contact species with 1 operational warship and 8 billion ground-based. We have 1 visible warship, she said. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion went very quiet again. Iris, beside him, began rapidly issuing orders to the sensor array team in a low, urgent voice. Seth Varol looked at the woman on his screen, alone in a 40-meter ship, surrounded by his fleet, telling him what she had and had not chosen to show him. And the cold that settled in his chest wasn't anger. It was recognition. He had met negotiators before. Hundreds of them across dozens of species. Diplomats who wept, who blustered, who bargained desperately and clung to technicalities. He had never met one who sat across from annihilation and narrated it like a weather forecast, which meant she already knew the weather. Iris, he said quietly. Already scanning, sir. Long range, full spectrum. He waited. Mara Voss waited with him, perfectly comfortable in the silence, as if she had nowhere else to be. The sensor report came back in 40 seconds. Iris read it again, then turned to him with the expression of someone who had just found out the ground beneath them was hollow. Sir, she said, I'm reading thermal signatures. Deep space, outer system boundary, dormant signatures. They're cold, running minimum power. She paused. I count 31 contacts. Possibly more. Some of them are very well masked. 31 ships, cold and dark and patient, sitting at the edge of the system, waiting. Configuration? He asked. Iris's voice was completely flat. Unknown, sir. Nothing in the database matches. He turned back to the screen one more time. Mara Voss had her cup raised halfway to her lips. She lowered it slowly when she saw his face. 31, he said. You were always going to find them, she said. We wanted you to find them, at the right moment. She tilted her head slightly. Are you ready to talk about terms, Commander? The negotiation took 11 hours. That number would later become famous. 11 hours to dismantle the groundwork of what had been projected as a 2-week annexation campaign. Officers on the Eternal Dominion would describe it differently depending on when they were asked. Immediately after, many of them called it a tactical retreat, a strategic recalibration, a necessary repositioning in light of new intelligence. 6 months later, in private, several of the same officers would use a different word. Mara Voss sat in her cockpit for the entire 11 hours. She did not take breaks that anyone could observe. She refilled her cup twice. She did not raise her voice. She never made a threat that she didn't immediately quantify with a specific legal citation, a historical precedent, or a number. She was, by every measurable standard, the calmest person in a several million-kilometer radius. It nearly broke Seth Varol's senior legal counsel. Commander Hispeth was the finest legal mind in the Imperial Navy. She had drafted annexation frameworks for 9 different planetary acquisitions. She had argued before the Accord Tribunal twice and won both cases. She had, on the second day of her career, correctly identified a 3-word ambiguity in an Accord subsection that had saved the Empire 4 trillion credits in disputed territorial claims. She was not a woman who lost arguments about Accord law. Mara Voss had spent the first 40 minutes of formal negotiations correcting her. Not aggressively, not triumphantly. The way a teacher corrects a student who is bright and genuinely mistaken, with patience and specificity, citing exact clause numbers and the amendment dates that altered them, twice referencing decisions from tribunal cases that Hispeth had not been aware existed, and doing all of this in flawless Accord formal register, which was an archaic dialect that most modern Vreth lawyers used imperfectly, and that Mara Voss apparently spoke like a native. By the 3rd hour, Hispeth had stopped arguing the foundational points and begun trying to negotiate the variables. By the 6th hour, she had stopped trying to shift the framework at all, and was focused entirely on minimizing the numbers. By the 9th hour, she had developed a faint tic in her left secondary eyelid that her colleagues had never seen before. Seth Varral watched all of this and said very little. Partly because his legal counsel was handling the technical details more effectively than he could, and partly because he was using the time to do something that felt, increasingly, like the most important thing he had done in this entire campaign. He was studying Mara Voss. Not her words. Her words were precise, documented, legally sound. He could review transcripts later. He was studying the way she negotiated, the rhythm of it, where she pushed and where she waited, which concessions she accepted immediately and which ones she let sit for a while before agreeing, the long pauses that he gradually realized were not uncertainty, but pressure, giving the other side time to hear the silence and fill it with anxiety. She never bluffed without a foundation. Every position she took that seemed extreme turned out within the hour to be supported by something she had already positioned: a relay broadcast, a legal precedent, a sensor contact at the edge of the system that his team was still trying to classify. She had built this whole structure in advance, every piece of it, and she had walked into the most dangerous room available to a single human being, and calmly begun taking it apart from the inside, not with weapons, but with the architecture she had installed before the door opened. At hour 7, during a recess that HFY had requested for what she described as legal review, but which Seth Varral recognized as recovery, he went to his private observation alcove, sealed the door, and stood looking out at the black needle ship floating off his port bow. His intelligence files had described humans as a promising but underdeveloped species, industrious, somewhat aggressive, technologically behind the galactic average. The files had been built by observers. He understood that now. They had watched humanity from a distance, cataloged what was visible, and built profiles from surfaces. And humanity, it turned out, had a remarkable talent for presenting exactly the surface that served them best. He thought about the 31 cold ships at the edge of the system, sitting there in the dark for, how long? Weeks? Months? A species that hadn't needed FTL until recently, that had no visible presence in accord space, that had apparently been quietly, patiently, invisibly building. What exactly? He wasn't sure he wanted the complete answer. When HFY returned to the channel, she had composed herself and had a counter-proposal ready on the reparations figure, a sophisticated argument involving inflation indexing and sector-based economic variance that Seth Varral thought was genuinely clever. Mara Voss listened to the entire argument, made 2 small notes, and then said, "That methodology was specifically excluded by the Accord Financial Tribunal in the Kessaran ruling, Standard Cycle 7041. The exclusion is in Appendix C of that decision, footnote 17. I can forward you a copy if your records are incomplete." HFY's eyelid tick came back. The final agreement, signed in the 11th hour under Accord formal protocol with 22 confirmed relay broadcasts as witness, contained 4 primary terms: full ceasefire, sector withdrawal within 30 days, reparations at the standard Article 44 rate, and a formal apology to be entered into the Accord public record within 14 days under the Emperor's seal. When HFY finished reading the terms back for the record, Mara Voss said, "Confirmed. Thank you, Commander HFY. You argued well." It was not sarcastic. That made it worse somehow. Seth Varral reopened his personal channel in the final minutes when the administrative work was winding down. Mara Voss looked for the first time, slightly tired, a looseness around her eyes, a slower cadence in her movements that suggested 11 hours of sustained precision had cost her something, even if she'd never let it show. "A question," he said. "Not for the record." She looked at him. "Go ahead." "The 31 ships at the system edge, who built them?" "Built." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "We did." "Humans." "Humans." "In what time frame?" She held his gaze. "That's 2 questions." He accepted that. "One more then. If we had fired, if we had opened the bombardment instead of answering your hail." "You were never going to do that," she said. "You couldn't have known." I knew your record, she said. 30 years of campaigns. You've never fired on a diplomatic contact, even enemy ones, even when it would have been tactically advantageous. She tilted her head slightly. I didn't come out here because I was brave, Commander. I came out here because I'd done the research. He stared at her. You chose me, he said slowly. Not the target. You chose me specifically as the commander to negotiate with. The Empire chose you to lead this fleet, she said. We decided that was a workable choice. It landed like a stone dropped into still water. They had not merely predicted the invasion, they had predicted the commander. Studied him, assessed him, determined that he was the right variable, the one most likely when presented with a complete architecture of disadvantage to make the rational decision instead of the proud one. They had aimed the entire operation at him, personally. What if you'd been wrong? He asked. About me? Mara Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then the 31 ships weren't just for optics, she said. The channel closed. The Eternal Dominion left the Sol system 29 days later, 6 hours ahead of the Accord deadline. The fleet it had brought, 14 vessels in total, the finest strike group the Empire had assembled in a decade, followed in tight formation, their drive signatures clean and logged with the Accord monitoring station that had been, per the treaty terms, established in the outer system. Neutral observers, 3 different species, all of them watching. None of the ships had fired a shot. HFY stood at the observation deck for the last time as Earth shrank behind him, that blue-green marble growing smaller, then becoming indistinguishable from the other points of light. He stayed there longer than was strictly useful. His officers gave him the space to do it. The report he would file with the Emperor was already drafted. It was accurate. Accord violations, legal exposure, coalition risk, intelligence failures at the source level. All of it was true. All of it framed the retreat as the rational choice, which it was. The Emperor's advisors would review it, challenge parts of it, eventually accept it because the alternative, disputing the Accord record in front of 47 witnessing civilizations, would cost more than the retreat. The apology would be filed under the Emperor's seal as required, 14 days from now, in language that had already been approved by the Accord's own formatting office. Mara Voss had submitted the formatting template in advance. He had found that out in the final hours from HFY, who had discovered it while reviewing the Accord filing requirements. The template had been submitted 4 weeks ago, before the Eternal Dominion had even entered the system, before negotiations had been formally opened, before anyone had confirmed there would be negotiations at all, because the template assumed there would be, assumed the specific outcome, assumed the specific language of the apology, and had pre-formatted it to ensure smooth processing by the Accord registry. She had filed the apology paperwork before the war ended, before the war was decided. HFY had delivered this information with the specific look of someone who had lost a game and had only just found the rule book that explained why they never had a chance. HFY had read the report 3 times, sat with it, and then done something that surprised even himself. He had laughed. Not with humor exactly, something adjacent to it, the laugh of a man who has been beaten by something genuinely extraordinary and has enough self-awareness to acknowledge it. The fleet crossed the system boundary. The Accord monitoring station confirmed their exit. The relay feeds, which had run continuously for 11 hours during negotiations and had then shifted to a summary format for the withdrawal period, logged the departure and transmitted confirmation to all 22 primary witness stations. HFY left the observation deck and went to his office. On his desk was a physical data chip, delivered in the final minutes before the fleet's departure by a small automated courier drone that had emerged from nowhere, deposited the chip on the Eternal Dominion's shuttle bay floor, and vanished before anyone could tag its trajectory. The chip contained a single document, and the document was addressed to him by name. He had read it twice already. He read it a 3rd time now. It was brief. 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was a formal acknowledgement of the ceasefire and an expression of what it called, in careful diplomatic language, mutual respect for the prudence shown by both parties. Standard language. Gracious without being effusive. The second paragraph was less standard. It noted that Earth maintained an interest in normalized relations with the Vreth Empire, that the Accord framework provided adequate mechanisms for such normalization, and that Earth would welcome the appointment of a formal imperial ambassador at Earth's discretion. It noted, with the same mild precision that characterized everything Maravos had ever said to him, that this offer would remain open for 18 standard months, and then lapse if not taken up. 18 months. Not indefinitely, not forever. A specific window, with a specific closing date, because even the offer of goodwill had been structured with a deadline. The third paragraph was 4 sentences. It was not diplomatic language. It was direct, personal, and written in a voice he recognized immediately. You made a rational choice under pressure. That is rarer than it sounds. The galaxy remembers the commanders who chose correctly at the hard moment. We will. No signature, no title. Just those 4 sentences, and below them a small printed image. The Earth, from orbit, exactly as he had seen it from his observation deck. He sat with the chip for a long time. The empire he served had spent 3 centuries building the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. 47 planetary systems under the imperial flag, 11,000 ships, an economy that stretched across 6 sectors. The Vreth were, by almost every measure that the galaxy recognized, a dominant civilization. They moved when they chose to move, and stopped when they chose to stop, and a single human woman, in a 40-meter ship he couldn't scan, had parked beside the most powerful warship in that civilization's arsenal, had a cup of something warm, and had restructured the terms of an entire war before he'd understood the war had already been fought. He turned the chip over in his fingers. He thought about the intelligence files. Promising but underdeveloped. Technologically behind the galactic average. 11 days to full capitulation. He thought about the 47 relay stations, pre-positioned before the fleet arrived. He thought about 31 dark ships at the edge of a system, cold and patient. He thought about a diplomatic immunity hull built from materials that required decades of metallurgical development, traded for by a species with no visible presence in Accord space. He thought about friends that weren't visible, relationships that weren't public, a species that had been building something in the dark and had not yet chosen to fully show what it was. He thought about 4 months of warning they had allegedly had. He thought about the word allegedly, and about how little he actually knew, and about how much it was possible he still didn't. Seth Varel placed the data chip in his personal document archive, locked it under his private key, composed a brief addendum to his report, 2 sentences, flagged for the Emperor's personal attention, noting that the pre-invasion intelligence assessment of Earth should be considered categorically compromised and recommending, strongly, that no further action be taken against that system, under any pretext, until a full and independent reassessment was complete. He noted, in the same addendum, that such reassessment should be conducted by someone with no previous assumptions about the target, using entirely new methodology, with particular focus on non-visible infrastructure and long-horizon strategic preparation. He did not write the word afraid anywhere in the addendum. It was not a word that appeared in imperial military correspondence. But he thought it, sitting there in his sealed office with the fleet humming around him, and Earth falling further behind with every second, not afraid of the 31 ships, not afraid of the legal mechanisms and the relay broadcasts and the pre-filed apology templates, afraid of the patience, of the scope of it, of what it meant that they had built all of that and then sent one person, not a fleet, not a threat. One person with a cup of something warm and 4 months of careful preparation, and the absolute unshakable calm of someone who already knew the outcome, afraid of what they were still choosing not to show.